The Gourmet Gladiator. Chapter 21. 1 year later. You owe me, Helios shouts at me as he holds up a blade to my throat. The smell of blood running down his arm is strong amongst the countless other orders within this sewer. You broke your own goddamn arm. Besides, what's in it for me to allow you to escape? I say with a dashing smile on my face. A little rough up if I'm being completely honest. But 1 whole year of this bastard in front of me bashing my face in with a bat. But now I hold the power. You're still a useless brat, Helios says angrily as he points the bloody knife at me. You know that you owe me. You better get me out of this sewer alive. I grip my sword tightly as my knuckles turn white. Theocla was in a bit of a rough shape, but all things considered still sharp as ever. You are pathetic, Helios. Heal your arm already and let's escape this literal shithole, I state as I hold up the flashlight in my left hand, shining it at the pothole right above our heads. I see that even though you owe me your life, you can't return a favor and heal me. Helios pouts before he walks over to the rusty metal ladder and heaves himself up to the pothole. He grunts as he pushes the metal disc out of his way. The sun harshly beams itself into the sewer, revealing my dirt-covered attire. I knew I shouldn't have worn a black leather trench coat in the sewer along with some blue jeans and white tank top. I shouldn't have worn white in general. In retrospect, I was just begging to get dirty today. I follow right behind him once he lifts himself out of the sewer. As I easily lifted myself out of the sewer, Helios and the rest of the gang were already circling me like vultures. I lift myself onto my feet and let out a sigh. My smile is still flawless and purely white, unlike these people who never heard of a dentist. Sadly, the icebreakers just went through the worst scenario, leaving only me, Helios, and 3 others. 2 chicks and a wimp to be a part of my gang. Well, Helios is still in charge, but with that arm his leadership is limited to maybe an hour or 2. Toby, you're the one who called the cops. The wimp known as Rig pouts. He's an ugly one of the group. Fat as hell and covered in acne. He was like a pig that just went through puberty. Yeah, I did. Because I thought it would be more fun, I say as I throw out my hands in excitement. You're continuously destroying this family, says the two-faced bitch known as Keela. She was skinny and dirty looking. She was that smart one of the group, meaning she could hack a computer or 2, but otherwise useless when it comes to powers. This ain't no family, idiot, I snapped at her. I walk up to her and raise my blade up next to her face menacingly. And don't forget that fact. Touch her and I'll break your arm again. Then here comes the big brute of the whole bunch. His name is Kevin. But fuck Kevin. He was just another bodybuilder obsessed with crime and piercings. But even though he looks like he lost a fight between a stapler and pen, I do have to give him credit for his power. You'll do no such thing, I say with a quiver of anger rising in my throat. Then lower your blade, Kevin says with his deep and stupid voice. My body shakes as I lower my blade, scraping it on the concrete floor. All right, everyone. Let's calm down. We got what we came for, Helios declares as he pulls out a palm-sized diamond from his coat pocket. The others smile at it, but I couldn't get the burning sensation of hatred off of my mind. I swing my blade at Kevin. Ice exploded in front of me, knocking me on my butt before I could land the killing blow. I looked over at Helios, who was breathing heavily with his hand out in front of him. Kevin looks at me now with the same burning rage in his eyes like my own. Hey, I shout before standing up. Why did you stop me? I ask as I point my weapon at Helios. You just attempted to murder a whole bank full of people. We are thieves and drug dealers. Most of the time there shouldn't be bloodshed. But you've completely changed from when I first saw you. I thought your power would be a good ploy to threaten the other gangs into an alliance. But you just tore them apart, Helios shouts at me, flinging spit on my face. You killed my family in front of me. Don't you dare play innocent. And since you got me in a bind, I can't kill you. But the others that stand in their way are no longer there. Even Bob fled into hiding along with George and that whore Rebecca. I am the sole reason why you can even call yourself an icebreaker. I couldn't handle the weight of my sword anymore. It feels like all my energy was spent in escaping the bank. These guys' powers aren't enough to sustain me anymore. This diamond is supposed to pay us double and make a route to get better gear for our next ploy. Yeah, but all you got now is your little girlfriend that is in prison. A place I know many people that would happily take her life. So don't even think about losing control of your feelings again. You're still a child, Helios states before shaking his head like a disapproving father. Him and the others walk away with me just behind them. Soon we'll be up against the largest gang for territory. They better get on my good side before then. Zen.
That was chapter 21, 1 year later of the Gourmet Gladiator. See, time skips. That's what I was going for in this chapter. I didn't know, because all that was really left before the time skip was him going, him talking to Helios and being like, hey, what the fuck, and all this other stuff. And I was like, perfect time to interject that, and just skip it and then intertwine it into the story. But, with that said,
The Gourmet Gladiator.
Let's move on to chapter 22, Bob the Bully.
The Gourmet Gladiator. Chapter 22, Bob the Bully. The memory of the first week as an official icebreaker was something. Let's just use the word terrible. Helios made quick work with introducing how harsh the world was. He gagged me and then threw a hood over my head. Don't say a thing. Don't scream. And once the hood is off of your head, I will require you to cry. Helios said. This had no meaning to me at the time. Only orders that I followed. I can still remember him unlocking my parents' front door and opening it. What are you doing here? I heard my dad's voice ask. I didn't think much, nor could I hear all that good after the crash. His voice was so shaky and quiet. Boom. Helios fired his gun. The next thing was a thud on the wood. For some reason that is when my body felt terrible. Not like in pain, but like as if something just attacked me on a spiritual level. Oh no. You killed him, my mom shouted. That was the voice that crumbled me. I knew who that was. And that was also the moment I understood who had been shot. Tears ran hot down my face as I breathed heavily. Do you have my baby? She continues to scream. Boom. Helios fired his gun again. I thrusted my body towards the sound of the hammer hitting the back of the gun. But a cold rush of pain comes up crashing into my already shattered ribs. I could swear that something in me bursted like a gusher. Then a hand hits the back of my neck, bending me over what felt like a pillar of ice. My head flashes with stars. I heard more ringing in my ears after that strike. But a sense of power was going through my body. Ice as it began to form on my body, a kick was sent into the side of my knee, breaking it. Snap. A hand grabs the back of my neck and lifts me up onto my one foot. The hood jerked off of my head, sending a rush of pain through my body as my head whipped back. Then that is when I saw my two dead parents overlapping one another. Their blood stained the floor that I used to walk around and play on. Helios looked at me with a smile on his face. Gangsters only have one family. Especially us icebreakers, Helios stated. But that went through one ear and out the other. I zoned out on the sight of my dead parents. A few days later, me, Helios, and a few other members, when we still had them, were walking down to the east side of the city. That's where Bob's gang was. I forget their name, but knowing Bob, it was something a little retarded. But at the time of heading there, there was only one thing on my mind. Mom. She didn't deserve to die like how she did. We stormed up to their little hangout. It was just an old skate park that was nearly abandoned. Bob was sitting on the edge of the tallest ramp. It was graffitied with skulls and all sorts of art. He sincerely looked like a king of douchebags up there as he looked down on everyone on his command. Helios looks at me and nods his head, gesturing towards Bob. Get him. We'll handle his henchman, Helios said. I looked up at Bob and thought about what he did to me in the past. He beat me up, made fun of me, and yet I still beat him once before. And at that time he stood right before me and I couldn't think of a reason that I wanted to hurt him. But orders are orders. I had to rush through with men engaging in battles to block them from interfering with me. I open the box and draw out my blade. A surge of power runs through my body. I jumped into the air, landing on top of the ramp with a thud. Bob doesn't stand up. He looks across the skate park, watching out as his goons fight mine. Looks like you're getting your revenge for those years, he said nonchalantly. He stood up and looked at me with a blank expression on his face. His hands went into his pockets before he took one step towards me. And you're so much stronger now than just a month ago. You're becoming something powerful. But if you let me run, can I tell you about George? Or to pique your interest more, I can tell you about Rebecca. He smiled as he looked me in the eyes. I had planned to just cut him in half where he stood. But with the enticing offer of knowing where Rebecca was, it was just more interesting. I lowered my weapon to where the tip of the blade struck the ground. Tell me about her, I demand with a stern tone. I could feel my arms beginning to grow in size along with my body. The sound of my bones stretching was uncomfortable. But as I loomed over Bob, I could see him look up at me with that expressionless face replaced with sheer terror. I only know that George and her are a thing now. And they're on the other side of town, Bob says with the corners of his mouth rising slightly. I turn to my right and with my sword I swing it as hard and fast as I could, cutting the gigantic flying metal needle in half before it could reach me. I turn back towards Bob to see him smiling like a maniac. You thought that George would leave my side. I was there when you beat him up. And that's when I spotted something interesting. You can only be beaten easily with range. I don't see how he thought that was the only way to beat me. And I still don't. Other collections.
That was The Gourmet Gladiator, Chapter 22, Bob the Bully. See, it's going a little bit back in time just to give you a little bit of what's happening. I like it, personally, but yeah, I'm not good at commentary. But now we enter in Chapter 23, Bob and George.
The Gourmet Gladiator, Chapter 23, Bob and George. A pressure was felt pressing into my back. I turned my body in time to see Bob's finger poking at me. He was teasing me. Already different than the first fight that I had with him. But that didn't matter at the time. I was here now with a mission to take Bob's head. I thought it was somewhat smart seeing as he ran a gang by himself. But it's obvious that he is just a child. I swing my sword at him, cleaving the ramp we stood on in half. There was barely any resistance on my blade. Bob was jumped backwards on the falling half of the ramp. He was getting away and at my fault too. But that wasn't just that. Another giant needle shoots out at me. I was too mad and into my emotions of Bob getting away from me that the needle lands into my arm, splashing my blood on the ramp that was holding me up. I turned towards the place the needle was coming from. There I saw it. Or more precisely, George. He was alone on another ramp with his arms dropping giant needles like they were apples. Then a giant hulkish man to his left and right heaves the needles onto their arms. This was when rage consumed me. I couldn't see anything but red. Their outlines were like scribbles of black lines. My body grew bigger, rougher, and more beastly. The teeth in my mouth bursted out, getting replaced with what I thought were blades. Fingernails turned to claws as a tail grows behind me. It was girthy in size and unlike a dolphin's tail it waggled side to side. I'm going to tear you into pieces, I shout before lunging towards the three men. The two hulkish men hurl the iron spikes at me. With the sword still in hand I brutishly knock the spikes away from me. I then jumped towards the man on the right and instantly clamped my jaws down on his head. Crack. His head shatters in my jaws. I could taste the tang of copper sliding down my throat as I spit out the man. George strikes out at me with his arm covered in blades. He struck my chest. I could feel his knives pierce my skin, but as for my organs I was just fine. I raise my sword up in the air, readying myself to strike him. George grows the blades taller, thicker, sharper out of his arms. Only one breaks. And that was the one already buried into my skin. I swing my sword at George. He raised his arm to block my mighty fiacre. But as an expression of terror and surprise comes on his face, my blade clears through his arm. George rolls out of the way of the finishing blow. But it was good to see him stare at his limb. I bent down and picked up his arm. His power was still running within the limb. I aimed my left hand at him. He looks over to see me. His eyes wide and my heart pounding in excitement. I boost the feeling of his power in my left hand and in tangled waves blades rush out of my arm at George. He stands up and with a nervous smile blades rise up and over his skin like armor. As my blades struck his they flung sparks but only mages to push him back. Well now since I've seen what he can do I can do it but better. I thicken the blades and push him back into a building. He looks at me and is terrified. I could hear him laughing nervously beneath his breath. You can't break this defense. I've used up all my strength to make these blades titanium, he said. But that isn't going to save him. I thickened and made the blades sharper once again. I shout out in frustration as I push the blades harder against him. The building that was behind him began to crack. I pull back my arm, allowing him to fall onto his knees. Before he collapses on his face, I strike my blades against his throat. That defense of his. And I couldn't pierce it. He would get his energy back, and against me pushing him up against the wall, he actually grabs onto my blades and begins to push me back. Now at his point I'm furious beyond what words can describe. I roar out and receive the blades from my arm. George lets them go and stands still. I could see his knees wobbling. But still in such a weak state he managed to push me back. I run up to him and swing my sword at him. I felt the wind, blood, and metal bend at the touch of fear. The power rush was going through my system. George flies back into the wall and at the other end of the building. Looking back at what it looked like, I could fortunately say that I was thankful to see that no one lived there. But for George, he stood back up and went limp. Blood was leaking out the bottom of his armor. It was a gruesome sight to see. But I was the only witness to this great tragedy. Or at least I would have been. A giant needle flied into the back of my left shoulder. I roar out in pain, jerking my attention back. That one man that I left alone did not run but instead stood on top of the ramp, thumping his chest proudly. "Come on," he shouted. But I didn't care for his words. I tightly held my sword and I chucked it towards the man. I hear him scream before hearing his body falling to the floor in 2 segments. I turned back towards George, only to see that George wasn't there. And to my right the screeching tires of a van runs away.
And that was the Gourmet Gladiator, Chapter 23, Bob and George. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.